Okay, now it's time to move on to the skirt. So I've taken my skirt pieces and I'm going to serge or zigzag just on a single layer, two of the edges, because I want to make sure that when I put my zipper in that seam has already been finished. So I'm going to serge or zigzag and then I'll be ready to put the zipper in. The next thing we need to do is take our zipper and figure out how long it is. Remember, we want the seam allowance on our, at the top is 1/2 inch. So we want our zipper to, zipper top to end about 3/4 inch down. So if it's 3/4 inch down, and then we're gonna mark out to our stopper. So once we have those measurements figured out, what we're going to do is stitch a temporary stitch for the first portion, and then we're going to move it to a permanent stitch. So for me, I'm going to start with a temporary stitch and then I will be adjusting it. So at 1/2 inch seam allowance, I'm going to begin to get that sewing started. So I'm going to sew down temporary, and then at my stopper point, I'm going to back stitch, and I'm going to adjust back to a normal stitch and finish the rest of the seam. Now I've pressed the seam open, and I'm going to take my zipper and I'm going to place it right on top of that seam. And I will be sewing this from the front, but I do want to get the placement settled from the back. And of course, I need to pin in the area where I'm going to go across. I want to avoid hitting the metal stopper. So once I have this pinned in, I'll be able to go to the machine and sew down one side, pivot across, and back up the other side. When I get to my mark, I'm going to turn, pivot, stitch across carefully, and you can do that by hand if you want, and get to the equidistance to the other side. So then I'm going to turn and go back up. Okay, we want to keep the same distance on both sides of the zipper. When you get toward the top, you may need to unzip the zipper to get by. I have enough room that I don't have to do that. Once your zipper is in, you can remove the stitch down the center to open up your zipper. So I'm going to take a small pair of scissors and very carefully open that stitch up without ripping anything. Now I need to remove all the threads and make sure that the zipper works. And it does. And then I can go to the iron and press it. The next step will be to do the opposite seam opposite your zipper. So this is going to end up our center front seam. And we're going to be sewing this at 1/2 inch seam allowance. And once again, you can either zigzag or serge once you've completed that 1/2 inch seam. The next thing we're going to do is take our bodice on the right side, and we're going to kind of lay it upside down, and we're going to take our skirt, again, right sides together, and right at that facing area, right where we had the fold back, we're going to place our skirt with a 1/2 inch seam allowance so that the little metal tab at the top of, or plastic tab at the top of my zipper will be at just below a 1/2 inch. I'm going to pin that. Then I'm going to pin around to the side of my garment and just keep pinning around. Actually, the next place that I'm going to be pinning will be the center front. So the center front, we're going to pin to the center front seam and the rest of the way around. Now I've tried the piece on, the dress onto the dress form. Looks pretty good. Now keep in mind, this is a mannequin, not a regular dress form, and she has a much smaller waist than our form. But it looks quite good. You can see the skirt is hanging really nicely. The one thing that we find in circle skirts though, is that as they hang out, the areas that are on the bias will get longer. So you can see this area right here is a little bit longer than the front. So if I had a very soft fabric, I would end up wanting to leave that on a form or hanging overnight, and it will begin to grow a little bit to what will be its final length. But the fact that I'm working in muslin and this piece is only, the skirt is only 15 inches long, I don't think it's gonna change all that much. So I can get ready to do the hem. The other part that I need to finish is this back area where the facing is. So I'm going to, I've pinned it, after I pressed it, I pinned it where it's going to cover up the seam. I've also put all of the seams, ironed them facing up toward the bodice. So now I have that prepared. You can see I have it prepared on the other side as well. So I can stitch this in the ditch from the front. So I can stitch right in here so that that's going to close that up. If you're more comfortable doing that by hand, you can do that by hand also. So once the whole piece has been examined, looked at, now I know I can do the hem and that final part of the facing. So to stitch in the ditch, I've prepared this and pinned it so I can go to the machine and I can stitch right in that area just to hold that facing down. I'm especially most concerned about the back side of it, but let's make sure we do that. And of course, throughout this whole process, I recommend using thread that matches. Of course, I'm using a contrast so you can see what I'm doing, but if this was thread that matched, it wouldn't be nearly as difficult to hide that seam in the Okay, so I can sew along that section and do the same thing on the other side. And all I want to make sure is that I've caught the facing. Now I'm preparing the hem. So first I went around and folded up just the smallest little 1/4 inch bend back. And then the second part, I'm going to go back and fold up a second time. So it's a double rolled hem. And this time I'm pinning carefully around there. You're gonna see, because it's a circle skirt, it's gonna be larger at the bottom than it is on the top. So there will be a little bit of extra ease in here. So we wanna make sure that at all your main points, the middle and the back, that it hasn't run and you don't start with a roping hem. So go ahead and prepare that, and then you can go to the machine and stitch it. Okay, let's sew the hem. So now if I had a serger, I could have serged the whole edge and then flipped it up once and sewn through. That's gonna be a lot easier than double rolling it. But the double rolling hem is nice and neat and really will look pretty in the end. So I've, like I said earlier, pressed it and prepared it for the hem by pressing it once at 1/4 inch and then rolling it up the second 1/4 inch. So now I'm going to be sewing this really on the edge. It's going to be edge stitching really this small roll hem. So I'm going to very carefully go around and make sure that there is a little bit of ease in here, that I don't allow it to keep coming with me. So I'm going to push it back a little bit so that the hem ends up looking nice. Now, if you get a little tuck in here on the inside side, that's okay. It doesn't, it's gonna help to control that hem. So just go the whole way around. And now the party dress is hemmed. One sleeve in, the other sleeve has to still be put in, but it's hemmed and the back and zipper are completed. So that's how you make a party dress. I just hope that after COVID-19 stay at home, somebody can wear the party dress and go out. So let's keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best.